Today I'm going to be replacing the wheel bearing on this wheel here. I've got all the whole wheel bearing kit here, including the seal, inner and outer bearing. These are right hand threads, so to undo you turn backwards towards the back of the vehicle. You need your wheel brace along with a long breaker bar, and obviously a new bearing kit. Let's have a look at the bearing kit itself. Got the inner bearing, outer bearing made in Japan, inner bearing also made in Japan, and the seal. We start by taking the wheel off just normally, and then we'll see. Don't forget to choke your back wheels before taking the wheel off, and let's start taking the front wheel off. Loosen up all the nuts before you jack the vehicle up. It's going to be done up very hard. That one. With the wheel nuts undone and the axle jacked up, what I'll do, I put a timber board under the jack so it doesn't sink into the ground, and I roll up the mud flap up the top there to give myself a bit of room when I'm jacking up. So next step is to take the wheel off. With the wheel off, we get a good view of the drum itself. Next step is to pop off that cap and undo the bearing retainer and remove the drum after backing off the shoes on it. Now that we've got an axle stand in place, as well as a jack, we can proceed with taking off the drum, backing off the shoes, and undoing the bearing retainer and removing the whole unit. Don't forget this. Before taking the drum off, let's just have a look at the play in the bearing. And there's shiploads of play in it. I'm guessing the outer bearing's gone on it. The only thing's holding it together is the inner bearing. Okay, let's get this cap off and get ready to take the drum off. We use two screwdrivers like this and pop it off like that. Then we got the retaining split pin. We'll have to take out like that. To take out the split pin, we'll use just a pointed screwdriver like the device in here, and we've got pliers to help us along on the other side and to flatten the retaining split pin. and we work it out like that. Use the hammer to help along. That comes out pretty quickly. And now we get a socket to undo this with. To undo the center bolt, you can either use a 41mm socket or the wheel brace itself. So it's a good thing the wheel brace fits on here perfectly for that bolt. It's a 41mm bolt. Put it aside and pop out the retainer. After that, we'll just release the shoes on the brake and take off the drum. It's out. Now release the brake shoes. Let's have a look what the bearing looks like. Yes, the bearing is buggered. The cage is buggered. The rollers are coming out. Yep, that's no good. Hopefully our stab axle's still right. To back off the shoes off the drum, we need to go to the other side of the drum, to back of the drum, and find this slot here, which is below the pipelines with an arrow. You want to find the adjuster in there and do it in the opposite direction of the arrow to loosen up. You'll find the adjuster by resting the screwdriver on top of that hole. On top of that hole there, and feeling for it on top of the same on the other side. There's another one of these. On the other side we've got a similar hole for the adjusters with an arrow there just above the bleeder hole, or bleeder nipple I should say. And again there's an arrow there, and we do it against the arrow in the opposite direction of the arrow to loosen up the shoes. This time you rest your screwdriver on the bottom of the hole and you loosen it up towards the back of the vehicle in the opposite direction to the arrow. Usually there's rubber plugs in these, so in yours you might find there's a rubber plug that you have to pop out to get to the adjuster. Bottom of the hole, and feel for the adjuster there, and click by click loosen them up. Like that. until the drum comes off easily. So looking at the same hole from above, get a feel for it there. Use two hands, it works a lot better with two hands. And I'd say that's plenty there. I'd say that's loose enough. Let's see if that comes off. Alright, let's have a look if the drum is loose enough. These are heavy things, and this is loose, and it will come out. Maybe give it a bit more, couple more clicks on the adjuster. Okay, give it a bit more loose on the adjusters, and it's going to come out, and it's heavy. Then I'm going to drop it, and it's out. Let's have a look at the stab axle. The inner part of the stab axle is alright, and the outer, now being cleaned from the grease a little bit, we can see that it's slightly some marks on it from the damaged bearing. Couple of scratches on that. Around there. The drum itself looks good. Let's take out the seal and the old bearing from here. We'll use a screwdriver to take out the old seal. Like that. And the bearing. We'll clean up all the old grease out of it. And there's plenty of that. Bearing pieces there. Get that out. We'll have to clean that out before new bearings can be installed and new grease put in. Alright, I've cleaned out most of the grease using paper towels out of there. The drum will have to be degreased later. Now let's have a look at the other side and clean out the other side. Other side still full of grease. So we'll get onto that and clean that out with some paper towels again. And all the friction surfaces on the inside will have to be degreased properly once you're done doing all that. There's plenty of filthy grease in there. Okay, with this side cleaned out a little bit as well, just using paper towels and degrease it. It's looking a lot better. And the other side a lot cleaner as well. All the grease is gone. I'm going to have to take it in to get someone to replace the shelves for me, because my press is not big enough. It won't fit in between the press. It's too big. While we're here, this is the adjusters that you're trying to manipulate through the hole from the other side. Get some light on it, like that. And you're moving them around like that. So that's it. This is pretty much ready for pressure cleaning. Get the rest of the grime out of it. It's looking a lot cleaner than what it looked like when it came out. Overnight there was heavy rains, so the stub axle got a bit rusty. I'm going to polish out the tip of the stub axle where there was a bit of nicks from the damaged bearing. I'm just going to use emery paper, 240 grit, little strips of it, get a bit of lube on it, and with this action here I'm going to polish out the rust and the nicks out of the stub axle until it's clean, like that, until the whole thing's clean. Now that I'm happy with the way the tip looks, the rest of the rusty surface I'm going to clean up with a scourer. And after cleaning the whole surface with a scourer, it's looking pretty good. Final clean with a non-greasy brake parts cleaner on all the surfaces within the brakes, including the friction surfaces of the drum. Now with everything clean, I've got new shells installed in the drum by a mechanic. And one thing I didn't show you is how I pushed out the old shells. I pushed out the old shells using an old rocker shaft and a reasonably heavy hammer, just by using that groove in there on both sides to tap it out. And I had the mechanic install new shells. Next is to grease up the bearings, and don't forget to grease up the gear bearings and put the bearing in first in the back of the drum. Then after you got the bearing greased up and inserted, then you insert the seal. Don't install the seal first, you won't get the bearing in. For grease I use this and have used it for years. No one's paying me to say this. I find this grease really good with PTFE. It's similar to the old Slick 50 grease. Now that we got the cavity packed full of grease, we can drop in the bearing. That's pre-packed with grease as well. Into place, and now we can install the seal in place after the bearing's been installed. Clean up the grease first. With the excess grease cleaned off, now install the seal by gently tapping it in with a lighter hammer evenly around the edges. and all the way in. Until it bottoms out, like that. Clean off all the extra grease. You don't want it seeping onto your brake shoes once it's installed. And now we turn the drum around and do the outer bearing. Clean the friction surfaces with brake cleaner, non-greasy brake cleaner. Alright, with a bit of help from my little machine, to lift the drum in place. It'll help me with trying not to damage the seal. And that's goes on over that. Now with the drum centered on the inner bearing with more grease packed into the cavity, we're ready for the outer bearing. It's just about the whole tub of grease gone inside there, and the retainers. Don't worry if you are left with a gap in between the shoe, in between the backing plate and the drum. That's how it is on the other side as well. So let's get the bearing in. Let's get that bearing in. Work that grease in there. With that machine, I've got that machine on my other video. What it is, it's a jack for lifting out gearboxes and transmissions out of your car, but it works for stuff like that as well. And it's even good for adjusting doors and things on cars. So I use it whenever, there's lots of uses for it, so it does come in handy. And let's get this on. Once again, wheel brace for the center bolt on the bearing. Here's a screwdriver on the end. And that is pretty tight, finger tight, but still tight. More grease inside the dust cap. With the wheel installed, I'm going to adjust the bearings after the wheel is on to get a proper feel for it. I've wedged the wheel in so it doesn't turn when I go to torque off that nut. As far as the factory manual for that nut goes, it says between 10 Newton meters and 34 Newton meters for the torque on it. The correct procedure is to tighten it as hard as to settle the bearing on the shells. We can still move the wheel, so that's not hard enough, that's not tight enough. So I'm going to use a proper breaker bar in long bar to settle the bearings first, and this is the correct procedure. And that's about bottomed out. At this stage you should not be able to move the wheel. You still can, but it's very hard. And the wheel is almost locked solid. You wouldn't be able to move the drum itself at this stage. So the bearings have settled onto their shells. Now you're almost solid. Now undo that. Loose again. And then do it up again to about half of that what you did before. So about there. And that's just getting tight now. And now for the final setting. And that's starting to drag now. And I would say that would be there just before it starts to getting dragging and getting heavy to slowing down by itself quickly. And that would be about the proper setting for the preload on the bearing. I have just repeated the procedure again just to double check, and it seems fine, and the castle in the nut is aligned perfectly with the hole for the split pin. It's not always the case. If that is the case, move it up to the next position where you can fit the split pin. If the split pin is a bit crooked and it won't go in, just straighten it out with a hammer against something hard and make it straight again, and that should fit in there like this. It's like that. Comes out the other side. And now we lock it with a split pin. Like that. Like this, bend the split pin around the nut. Like that, and it's locked. After you lock the split pin at both ends, dust cap goes on. Like that. What we do now is grab the wheel and try to move it from side to side. Make sure there's nothing loose, there's no clicking sounds. And that's the wheel bearing done. There's one more thing to do. It's just as important, is to go back at the back of the drum, through the backing plates, through those holes again, and expand the shoes again up against the drum. What I would recommend is that you do this on both wheels. Expand the drums to their maximum so they contact the drum surface, the friction surface, and bottom out or top out, and then start widening them down gradually, click by click, until you got the brakes adjusted on both sides equally for even braking. So we're back at the back of the drum at the adjuster hole. This time you do it in the direction of the arrow, again on top of the hole for this one, and on the bottom for the other side, on the other side of the axle. So it goes filthy. Alright, so top of the hole, rest the screwdriver on top of the hole, and wind out the drums and the shoes until they hit the drums on both sides of the wheel. Again, I roll up the flap, makes it easier to get to. Same thing on the other side of the wheel, other side of the axle. Rest it on the bottom and in the direction of the arrow. Wind out the adjusters until they can't be wound out anymore and hit the drum. At that stage, you go to the wheel on the other side and do the same. And then start winding them back for brake adjustment. Do it both equally by the same amount on both sides for nice even straight braking. I have both adjusters maxed out in the direction of that arrow and hard up against the shoes, up against the shoes hard up against the drum on both sides. Same on this side, in the direction of the travel, in the direction of the arrow. And remember what I said about putting the board under the jack so it doesn't sink into the ground? Well, have a look what happened to the axle stand. The paving that it's sitting on sunk into the ground by about an inch, 2.5 centimeters for everyone who's metric. Now we're going to do the same on the opposite side wheel. Max out the drum, the shoes up against the drum prior to adjusting. Both wheels are now locked solid, I can't move it. So the brakes are fully expanded, and now we back them off evenly from side to side by side, and the same on the other wheel on the other side. And that your brakes adjusted with even braking from side to side so it doesn't pull to one or the other side when braking. This is very important to get this right for your safety and ease of driving too. I have backed off the shoes 3 clicks and you can still hear them drag. So again, one more click on both sides and we'll see how that goes. So 4 clicks on each side ended up doing the job, and it's spinning drag free. Now I'm going to back off the other side wheel by 4 clicks as well, and that's the job done, ready for a test drive. first take out the jack and the axle stand. Wheel nuts done up and test drive time. And now for a brake test from 65 k's, no hand. That is beautiful, very nice and straight.